Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Israel at War, an update on TV7 News Israel. And this is our last update for the year, barring some unexpected event tomorrow, the last day of the year. And we are going to have some stock taking for the entire year, for the entire war, to find out the various fronts and campaigns. Where does Israel stand? Where does the region stand as the year went by? And this is day 451 of the war. We started with the Hamas assault and massacre on October the 7th, 2023, as we are heading into our third calendar year, 2025. And with us are three distinguished brigadier generals in the reserve, or retired as they choose, depending on their whims or practice. Brigadier General Reserve or retired Mark Kimmett of the U.S. Army, a seasoned officer at CENTCOM and other posts, but also an Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. General Kimmett, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And two IDF one-stars, Brigadier General in the reserves, and Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly of the Israeli Directorate of Military Intelligence, as well as Mossad, where you headed the intelligence division. Surely you remember that, even at your ripe old age. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Avian.
And in uniform, on active reserve duty, except for this show, where you are, of course, free to present your personal views, Brigadier General in the IAF, Doron Gavish, formerly the head of the IAF Air and Missile Defense, and right now in a similar position in charge of the Air and Missile Defense Task Force. Thank you for all three of you. General Gavish, if you may, let's start with the campaign which the Israeli Air Force has been conducting, mostly on its own, but also with allied forces, headed, of course, by CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, against the various ballistic missiles, rockets, and drones launched at Israel from almost every direction. How do you sum up the IAF ability, statistically or otherwise, to intercept most of the aerial threats against Israel?
Well, Amir, I think that if we are looking back to the last year or from the beginning of this war, maybe a few numbers just to make sure that we all understand the magnitude of this threat. So we had overall 37,000 projectiles that were shot toward Israel. And when I'm saying projectiles, the vast majority of them are rockets. Some of them are missiles in hundreds, and some of them are UAVs in thousands. And this is the overall numbers of projectiles. It is unprecedented, the number, of course, that we had to deal with. This is the first thing. The second thing, which is important to say, is that during this war, we applied our doctrine and our strategy of fighting against those projectiles. And when I'm saying we, it means the Israeli forces, but also CENTCOM leading the coalition. And the four pillars, which we've talked about more than once, is attack, meaning that you're trying to deny as much as you can your enemy's capability before they've been launched toward you. The second one is alerting the civilians, alerting the military, strategic installations, and so on. And the fourth and the third and the fourth are the active defense, actively intercepting those projectiles, and passive defense, which is, of course, the orders that are being issued by the Home Front Command, mainly asking the population, the civilians, to go into their shelters. And by doing all of that, the amount of people that were hurt during the last year from those projectiles is very, very, very low. This is the first important thing to say. And the second one is that we can say today that we are standing plus minus around the 85-90% of interception rate, which is also quite a significant number. So I think that the short answer to your question, humbly saying, is that the Israeli air missile defense and also the coalition air and missile defense, when it comes to the threats over Israel or toward Israel, was very successful during this war and the last year.
General Sofrin, if we take the Ron Gavish's numbers, 37,000 projectiles of all sorts, and you divide it by the 451 days, it comes to almost 100 projectiles daily, or 4 projectiles every hour. It is a staggering amount of fire to absorb. And therefore, one of the questions which this begs is that if you have 4 pillars, you must put something on the pillars, a roof. And this roof used to be deterrence. Whatever happened to Israeli deterrence? It's not there.
I think that October 7, 2023 changed the equation in the Middle East. That means that if you look at what happened on that day, Hamas was not deterred, and Hamas, even though the concept in Israel was that they are deterred, they launched this lethal attack on our kibbutzim, on the neighboring kibbutzim that were surrounding Gaza Strip, and even got to Sderot, which is a little bit far away, and even to more distant places. And without thinking that they are deterred, and they thought that they can handle or fight without any problem with the IDF. And actually they succeeded on the first 24 hours to capture a territory inside Israel for the first time since 1948, and to hold it for at least 24 hours. Now that gave what we call a very backwind to Hezbollah at the northern front, that saw that Israel is vulnerable, and Israel is not that horrible devil that they imagined or they thought Israel is. And they allowed themselves to begin engaging Israel on the northern front for at least almost more than a year, or almost a year, until we began to change the equation on the northern front. And take into consideration that the projectiles came out from Yemen as well, from the Houthis, and from Iraq. And that means that the Israeli deterrence, for at least on the first round, was lost. And it only began to turn down the wheel only when we began acting, first of all, in Gaza, and demolishing the military capabilities of Hamas. Second, on Lebanon. And the third one is to hit in Iran, to hit in Yemen, and to prove that there's no distant place for us to arrive, and we can go anywhere, anytime, and cause any damage we think, and we can, and as we choose. So I think that now the deterrence is back on the side of Israel, because I see what the Iranians are doing. The Iranians are afraid to react on the attack that we carried out on October 26th, on this year, on 2024. And they don't react because they think that we can cause a more huge damage to them if they try to attack us one more time. and the Houthis suffered our attacks, and they know that we can do more than that. And so I believe that deterrence now is back to its own position. Hamas is no longer a threat on Israel. If you look at Hezbollah signed the agreement for ceasefire because it was on a weak place and not on what we call on the foresight or winning side. It was very badly beaten, and they chose to sign this agreement and to save some of their capabilities without being demolished at all.
General Kivit, what we just heard from Doron and Amnon, this is the view from the inside. But of course, even though these are our experts and they have put many years, more than 30 years each, into service, nevertheless, they are Israelis. They have esprit de corps, organizational pride in their own branches, as well as in the IDF itself. How does it look to you, perhaps more detached, if not more objectively?
Well, no, I can't disagree with anything that's been said there, and I'm quite pleased with the great harmony in terms of the strategic thinking between the Israeli Defense Forces and CENTCOM. But I think the one question that we haven't answered yet is why did deterrence fail in the first instance? Now, I'll give you my theories and my personal views, and I may be entirely wrong. But my view is the proximate cause was not only the Abraham Accords, which were moving along even under Biden, except he wouldn't say the name. But to me, the most important issue, and I stand to be argued with, was the killing of Qasem Soleimani. The fact remains is that Qasem Soleimani had the proxy system, the axis of resistance, the ring of fire. He was the one that was able to counsel and train and in many ways run that proxy operation in the region. Nobody could look at what Hamas did 454 days ago and say that was rational. Hamas was deterred under Qasem Soleimani, wisely so, because he knew that this is what would happen. Qasem Soleimani wisely ran the system inside for Hezbollah, all of them dependent upon Iranian support. And you could go on, whether it's the Iraqi Hashid, whether it was some of the operations from inside Syria, and for that matter, the Houthis. So if I was to write a book one day, I would try to link the failure of deterrence to the reason deterrence failed, because the actions of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Hashid, and Iran for that matter, where Qasem Soleimani frankly had more power than any other government official short of the Ayatollah, when he was killed, this all fell apart.
Soleimani was killed exactly 5 years ago in early January of 2020. And General Sofrin, back to you. It's a very interesting and convincing theory regarding the safety catch on the Iranian guns throughout the region. And one can also compare it to what happened in Lebanon in 2005, then a year later too, of course, when the Syrians left, which means that if you have a patron, a senior partner, and they leave, the kids on the block get crazy. And you spent a lot of time in the Northern Front as an intelligence officer. Now you have lived to see the fall of the Assad dynasty. What are your insights?
First of all, I think that what happened on the Middle East is what we call a strategic change. We change strategically the equation in the Middle East. That means that Hezbollah, that was what we call the greatest threat on Israel from the Northern Front, is no longer a threat. I don't say that it was totally defeated, but his capabilities are reduced. He's weaker than he used to be before. And there is a chance if the Lebanese people will be bold enough and with a lot of will, they can even weaken him more by choosing a president, first of all, that will be accepted not by Hezbollah only, by the people or the parliament in Lebanon, and not necessarily agreed by Hezbollah, just like it was before. And second, Hezbollah is now deterred, and Hezbollah doesn't have any routes to get more ammunition and more weapon systems like it used to be before, because Syria is no longer a passing area for them for the Iranians to bring weapon systems coming out from Iran via Iraq and via Syria to Lebanon. Now it is closed, and they can't get through the air because we control the air, and they can't make it by via sea because we control the sea. And so Hezbollah remained with all it says, and that's it. Just like the Iranians are now exposed, and they have only the missiles they have in their arsenal, and they can't produce new missiles. So everybody understands that it's on limitations. Now, when you look what happened in Syria actually, it was kind of a domino move coming out from from what happened in Lebanon, from what happened in Iran, and the fact that the Turkish president pushed those organizations of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the northern part of Syria to move away and to begin moving south to Damascus. And suddenly we saw that the Syrian army doesn't want to fight. Soldiers will not die for President Bashar al-Assad. The army was totally demolished in a few minutes, almost without even shooting one bullet. And that is a great achievement, I believe, in the cornerstone of the strategy of the Middle East, and that leaves the area very weakened. And now we have to learn what happens in Syria, how the new regime is going to act, and of course the role of Turkey inside Syria.
General Gavish, what is your view? And because you are no longer a career officer, you may have a non-establishment view which you can share regarding the buildup of the IDF on several levels within your own branch or arm, the Air Force, the ratio of fighters, drones, and your own units, the air defense units. Was it the right mix? And the Air Force versus the Army, the ground forces. If Israel now looks at how it built its forces and is going to rebuild, refresh its doctrine, and then its investment in the next generation of forces, what is the right mix?
Well, this is one of the main issues that would be the outcome of the lesson learned process of the last war. I believe that in general we could say that every military would say there is not enough forces, we need more than what we have. But unfortunately, this is also what the facts around us showed us. We were preparing ourselves for a short war. This is a war that is almost 1.5 years. We were, from a strategic point of view, we were preparing ourselves for one, maximum 2 arenas at the same time. We found ourselves against 7 different arenas, completely different story. And this is something that, of course, we would have to look at inside. Not only in the military level, also in the national level. How much are you going to invest in your defense? By the way, not only on the military, also other organizations that would have to be built up much more robust because of the need of Israel to be basically all over the place. We still need to be very alert to what is happening in Lebanon with the Hezbollah. We are still needing to look at Syria, as Amnon just rightly explained. Iraq is still there. The Iranian, our main threat, is still there. The Houthis, which became a new enemy during this war, and of course what is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank. So we have to be prepared to all those different areas. We have to be prepared 24/7 and for a long time. What is happening today is that Israel basically is using a lot of his reserves, but looking into the future, we would have to be much bigger, much stronger, and build in a way that we could sustain a long, very long conflict situation, and having the answer for all the different regions and all the different threats that we are looking at.
General Kimmett, as you recall better than any of us here, in the summer of 1973, TRADOC, the Training and Doctrine Command, was set up, and a few months later, the Yom Kippur War broke out, and then General Depew and General Starry and others came to Israel and launched their lessons learned expedition, the Airland Battle and the other manuals and doctrine which shaped the U.S. Army and perhaps the Joint Force towards Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Do you expect any such inquiry now following this war, or is this not a case that the U.S. military can learn from because it is preparing for a near-peer confrontation?
Well, I would say two things to amplify what was said about ammunition stocks and capabilities in Israel. That is dwarfed by what we're learning in Ukraine. We certainly have been providing significant amounts to the Ukrainian military, and we've determined significant shortfalls in industrial capacity, whether it's the production of artillery rounds, certainly SAM-3, air defense weapons that we're using on the water. There has to be, particularly among the Europeans, a rebirth of the industrial capacity for the ability to fight wars. This holiday from history that we've taken since 1991 is being addressed intellectually. Now let's see if it's going to be addressed practically. The second point that I would make is, in many ways, we are relearning in Ukraine what I learned as a young officer from the airland battle tactics, techniques, and procedures that Don Starry and the Boathouse gang developed for airland battle and for the follow-on forces attack. What I'm seeing in Ukraine looks eerily similar to the defensive operations that we fortunately never had to implement, but were at the core of our fighting capability along the West German border. I was a chief of plans for a division then, and when I see what's happening in Ukraine, I'm saying it's too bad we don't have a reserve force in the United States. You're either retired or you're on active duty. But there's sure a bunch of gray hairs like me that could have gone in and talked about massing fires, follow-on forces attack, sensor to shooter links that in 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've raised a generation of officers, as we did in the Vietnam War, that really don't understand this type of mid and high intensity war. And certainly the US Navy never anticipated what's happening on the Red Sea in terms of the types of attack, the numbers of attack, and how long that ship sea battle is going on, because we've always anticipated a short, violent war. And they are taking those lessons, the US Navy, and applying them to doctrine for China. And in Ukraine, I think we're talking more about doctrine for land force combat, similar to what we're seeing inside of Ukraine now.
General Sofrin, you fought in the Yom Kippur War as a very young draftee, an infantryman. And one of the lessons that you always point out to is that Israel should never be caught unprepared, surprised, yet it was. But is there a fear that instead of complacency, Israel will now be so alarmist that it will invest too much in readiness?
First of all, I think that we have to be ready. As Doron pointed before, we have to be ready or prepared to fight in certain arenas and not only one or two. That means that even though now, let's say that Gaza is no longer a threat on the Israeli rear, but nevertheless we are fighting in Gaza, and now it is guerrilla fighting. It is another type, another mode of fighting, but we still fight there. And I don't know how long we can, or we have to be there and to go on fighting. I believe it's going to take more time than ever been thought before. Same goes on Judea and Samaria, that you have to operate on a daily basis to deny any attempt to carry out attacks on Israelis or on inside Israel from the other side. And so on and so on. That means that we have to be prepared to fight in certain arenas that day. Second,
So
we
the
have
rest,
to be prepared.
General Sofrin, the rest will have to wait for next year because we ran out of the year already. And obviously, Doron Gavish's colleagues are ready at any time of the day and night, as we have experienced lately with the Houthis. For the time being, thank you, all three of you, Mark Kimmett, Doron Gavish, Amnon Sofrin. This has been the last update of the year from TV7 News Israel. For the time being, thank you to all of our viewers throughout the world. Happy New Year, and we will be back in early January.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.